Hi everyone, my name is Sam. This is my first YouTube video, so please be nice or don't, I don't care. And today is the beginning of my 2019 read-a-thon. At the beginning of 2019, I had the idea to read as many books as I possibly can and vlog about them all along the way. I don't really have a set goal in mind. I'm going to try for at least 100 books by the end of the year, but I have no idea how busy the summer is going to be or how my work schedule is going to impact this, so I'm just gonna play it by ear. This list includes the first 5 books I've read this year, the last of which I just finished yesterday at the time of this video. And none of these books are new. The most recent one is, I believe, from 2011, but these are all from authors whom I've never read but have wanted to get into for some time. So 2019, I decided, was the year I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to try to avoid giving too much away as much as I can, because I do recommend that you check all of these books out yourself, but inevitably 1 or 2 plot details are going to slip, so just keep that in mind. Number 1, I started off with a classic, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Relatively new to Tolkien. I had only seen Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy for the first time last year, and loved them, of course. I had actually seen the first Hobbit movie in theaters when it first came out. I got the tie-in edition here. And I liked it okay, but not enough to justify paying to see the next 2. I had a vague idea of what I was getting into, having seen the film, which barely covered half the story, and I understood that Middle-earth originated as children's stories, for his children specifically, that eventually matured into ones for adults. I have not read The Lord of the Rings yet, so book-wise I don't really have anything to compare this to. But despite a whimsical tone, I think this is definitely a rare book that can be enjoyed equally by an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old. One of Tolkien's biggest strengths as a writer was his uncanny knack for world building, and for his introduction to Middle-earth, he instantly makes you feel like you're in the dungeon with Smaug, or at home in Bag End without the lengthy introductions I expected from his first outing. If I had one gripe with this book, it'd be the minimalist writing style. This really isn't a problem for the majority of the novel. I actually think this is one of the reasons it's so accessible to so many different age groups. But towards the end of the book, there are things like major character deaths and pivotal plot points that are just sort of explained away in a couple of sentences. But overall, though, I really love this book. I'm definitely going to explore Tolkien's other works. I am going to read Lord of the Rings eventually, and I can definitely see myself revisiting this someday. Number 2 is Soul Music by Terry Pratchett. Pratchett's 16th Discworld novel, the book tells 2 main interwoven plots. The first of a teenager named Susan Stowhite, who, upon discovering that she is the granddaughter of Death himself, must fill in for him once he abandons his duties, but gradually discovers herself in the process. The other focuses on a group of musicians struggling to make it big in the bizarre city of Ankh-Morpork, a human guitarist named Impikellen, later Buddy, a troll percussionist named Laius Bluestone, later Cliff, and a dwarf horn player named Glod Glodson, who become the Discworld's first rock band, but as their star rises, their music and fame gradually take a toll on the universe around them. I had seen the BBC miniseries adaptation of Pratchett's later book, Hogfather, which I highly recommend, and after hearing that this was sort of an origin story for those characters, I decided to make this my first Pratchett novel, and it totally delivered. If you're as big a fan of dry British comedy as I am, this is for you. There's my cat interrupting the shot. Hey. Bye. What I understand, a recurring theme in the Discworld series is satirizing aspects of everyday contemporary life and culture, in this case the music industry. And the story about Buddy and Cliff and Glod's band, or the band with Roxanne as they come to be known, it's a pretty much traditional rise to fame story. It actually kind of feels like a rock biopic in the vein of Bohemian Rhapsody or Walk the Line at times. But Pratchett does a really good job of balancing this kind of archetypical story against the weirdness of the universe. And I always love contrasts like that. I love Pleasantville, or My Entire High School is Singing into the Sea. It's a really obscure reference. Death's job is He visits people when it's their time to die and removes their souls so they can move on to the next life. And this is the way it's always been, and it's the only thing he's ever known. But from his first appearance, you see how much this has taken a toll on him and how much it's affected him personally. And even though he tries to abandon his responsibilities, he needs to accept and love his place in the universe, regardless of the risks associated with it. I think this was a great introduction to Discworld and Pratchett's works in general. So whether you're a longtime fan looking to revisit it, or a newcomer like me, I highly recommend. Number 3 is Wonderstruck by Brian Selznick. Selznick's style is sort of prose graphic novel hybrid. In this case, he uses them to tell two distinct interlocking stories. The story told in traditional prose is of Ben, who's a young boy growing up in 1977 Minnesota, and the story told entirely through the illustrations is about Rose, who's a young deaf girl living in Hoboken during the late 1920s. The story told in traditional prose is of Ben, who's a young boy growing up in 1977 Minnesota, and the story told entirely through the illustrations is about Rose, who's a young deaf girl living in Hoboken during the late 1920s. Both characters leave home looking for absentee parental figures. Ben recently lost his mother, and he has no idea who his father is, so he leaves his aunt's house in Minnesota and goes to the Museum of Natural History in New York City because his only clue to his father's identity is there, and 50 years earlier, Rose leaves her neglectful father's home to reunite with her mother, who's a silent film star, but nothing goes the way they'll think it will. As Rose is deaf, she experiences the world almost completely visually, and what Selznick does is he puts us on equal footing with her, so we actually get to see the world as she does, which is really unique, especially for a young adult novel. Despite having barely any dialogue until the end and no internal monologue, I was genuinely moved by her side of the story in a way I didn't expect for a wordless narrative. And I think this really speaks to Selznick's talents as an author and illustrator. My only real criticism of Wonderstruck is that Selznick writes with this sort of detached style in a way that it sometimes feels like we're being told instead of shown. And this really negatively impacts Ben's character. I think he comes across as a little bland and definitely not as compelling as Rose. And I know I just praise Selznick's work as a storyteller, but I think he might be a little better as a visual storyteller than a literary one. This is a young adult book leaning more towards the younger side of young adult. I guess it could be considered middle grade, depending on who you ask, despite the sort of daunting length, mostly thanks to the full-page illustrations. And I personally didn't have a problem with this. For me, I don't really care who it's aimed towards as long as it's a compelling story. But I understand why this might turn off some older readers. Despite some of my qualms with the characterization, I did really enjoy this book, and I do highly recommend it. So I was originally going to read The Color of Magic as my next book, but I got through Wonderstruck way sooner than I thought I would, and The Color of Magic was at home at the time I was still living at school. So, in the meantime, I decided to read Selznick's precursor to Wonderstruck, and arguably his best-known work, The Invention of Hugo Cabret. If this sounds at all familiar, a few years ago, Martin Scorsese adapted it into his wonderful film Hugo, which if you have not seen it, just pause this video right now, go watch it, then come back, it's that good. And the book and film are virtually identical. Like, Scorsese made a few embellishments in supporting characters and combined a few characters, but really that's it. So if you're a stickler for book accuracy in film adaptations, this is a win for you. Selznick described his book as not exactly a novel, not quite a picture book, not really a graphic novel or a flipbook or a movie, but a combination of all these things. And I don't feel like you can really get a sense of what he means by that until you read it for yourself. And unlike Wonderstruck, he uses the words and pictures interchangeably to tell a fully linear story. I think it worked a little bit better with the alternating timelines, but it still adds a little touch of whimsy to an already whimsical story. It's way less gritty than Wonderstruck. It's much more of a fantasy rather than a coming-of-age story. So I think Selznick's sort of reserved writing style works much better here. And also, he actually incorporates images from Georges Méliès, the famous early film director. Georges Méliès, who plays a pivotal role in the story, actually incorporates images from his films. I just thought that was cool. And that's all I'm going to give away about the plot, because I think part of the fun of this story is going in blind, whether you see the book or the movie first. They're virtually the same, just different takes on it. But I do highly recommend seeing both. Have sort of a double feature, because you can really, despite the length, get through this within a few days. Read the book and see the movie, read the book. Just do both. It's a package deal, and a 10 out of 10, definitely recommend. So the fifth and final book for this video is going back to Terry Pratchett, The Color of Magic. This is actually the first Discworld novel. It was published in 1983, and I did really like it overall, but it really shows that it's the first. The book is really more a collection of novellas and short stories than a fully cohesive novel. It follows two characters, this completely inept wizard named Rincewind, and Two-Flower and his magical luggage, who is the first tourist in the Discworld. And it's broken up into 4 segments, which I understand is pretty unusual for the Discworld books. And each segment is basically its own story, like its own adventure. Sort of in that sense, it plays more like a direct parody of epic quest fantasy like The Hobbit. And it's very episodic, like, they defeat this one villain, they go here. They defeat this one villain, they go there, without any other mention of the other stories. So it did have sort of an aimlessness at times. There were scenes that dragged on way too long, didn't really go anywhere. But again, all in all, I was mostly positive on this, and I did like it enough to buy the next Discworld book, The Light Fantastic, which picks up right where this left off. And I just started reading it yesterday, and so far I like it much better than this, so it was worth it. But that's all I have for now. These are the first 5 books I've read this year so far. Like I said, I'm just starting up with the 6th. Hopefully I'll be through that soon so I can have another video out to you, because the 7th and 8th are pretty short. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get through the 9th and 10th fairly quickly, but knowing me, probably not. But thanks for reading with me, and please let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, if you liked them, hated them, whichever. So please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.